Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irenicast. I don't want to waste any time getting into this week's episode. I just want to say at the top of the show that if anything during the conversation that Casey is about to have with Jay Bakker interests you, we have links in the show notes, and those are at irenicast.com/161. That's irenicast.com/161. Also, in the show notes, you'll be able to get all the information you need to find out more about Irenicast. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn this thing over to Casey, and we hope you enjoy this week's interview with Jay Bakker.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are Irenicast. I'm Casey, and today, Rajiv and Jeff and Bonnie and Alan are on assignment. Thank you for joining us for this conversation to provoke your progressive Christian imagination. This week, I am here with Jay Bakker. It is such an honor to be with you, Jay. Thank you for your time. We're going to be talking about redemption. But before we jump into that conversation, I would love for you to just sort of tell us about who you are.
Well, it's great to be here. And I love doing podcasts. It's so much fun. I'm Jay Bakker, obviously. And I run a church called Revolution and been doing Revolution for about 24 years now.
Wow.
It started out, kind of started out as a punk rock church and hippie church and skateboarder thing. And over time, the evolution of Revolution has been probably theology. And our the theology has definitely changed and grown quite a bit. I am the son of Jim and Tammy Faye Bakker, who were very popular, to say the least, televangelists in the 1980s, who had a scandal happen to them in 87 where they lost everything and they were kind of the laughing stock of the world. I mean, the church world and the non-church world, Saturday Night Live skits, all that kind of stuff. And so I went through seeing my parents have everything to having nothing. My father ended up doing 5 years in prison. There's a lot about that, and you can Google it if you're that interested. That's kind of the basis of me. I do a lot of different work. I guess I'm probably best known for my work with for LGBTQ rights, probably 12 or 13 years ago. But yeah, I just do a church called Revolution, and we're pretty much online, a podcast that you can listen to anywhere.
I was going to say just a church. You said 4 podcasts. I know you have some books, right? I mean,
yeah, I've got 3 books I've released. I'm working on 2 more right now. Hopefully going to find a publisher soon. And yeah, I mean, I do a lot. I do Loosen the Bible Belt podcast with a comedian friend of mine, where we've done a lot for LGBTQ rights and trying to create an atmosphere for good discussion and good disagreements. I do a Meet Your Congregation because we're mostly online church. Majority of our congregation is online. And I do the Revolution podcast. So that's 3, but I'm sure a 4th one will come up soon.
I'm sure it will. And you're always welcome here. That's for sure.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So, you talked a little bit about your parents and their journey. And as we are getting ready to talk about redemption, I wonder how you see your legacy connected to theirs. You have done a lot of amazing work, as you've said, around LGBT issues. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
It definitely feels like I kind of took off from where they were in the mid 80s. My mom did an interview with an openly gay pastor. She also did an interview, and this was huge, especially in the 80s. Did an interview with a man who had AIDS. And I mean, I don't think Ronald Reagan had even said the word AIDS yet.
That's right. Yeah.
And, my parents were always very inclusive and very loving. I mean, their theology wasn't perfect by any means. My dad was into the prosperity gospel, and he's since gotten out of that. But the core message was always love. I mean, my dad ended every show with "God loves you, he really does," and all that kind of thing. And so I think they definitely laid a foundation for me to do what I do, to have the questions that I have. I'm an autodidact, which means I'm just self-taught in theology and philosophy. But that grew out of a deep conviction of loving others. And when I saw my family lose everything and go through that, I saw a side of the church that I had not seen before that was just everybody turned on them. They were the butt of jokes at churches even. And so it was one of those things where I saw this huge scapegoating happen to my parents, and people just kind of almost blamed them for everything that was bad in the church. And I saw great hypocrisy, and it took me many years to come to terms with that, and kind of seek that out. And especially when I started to discover the message of grace, which is probably my main focus, has always been my main focus, is grace. I realized that that was missing from the evangelical church, and that's something that needed to be brought back in. And honestly, that's why I'm stuck doing this church that I started when I was, 18 or 19 with a few friends, is because of that message. Even when I've had, dark nights of the soul and nights and times where I don't know if there is a God, the message of grace has continued to push me forward.
So when you say that, like that, the message of grace, what does that mean to you?
I mean, basically the idea that we are unconditionally loved, that we are accepted for who we are. I mean, as we talk about redemption, we'll cover some of that, but this idea that, even if you think about, I think it's a verse in Romans where it's either Romans or Corinthians, all fall short of God's standard, but yet God in his gracious kindness declares us not guilty. This idea that none of us, we're all humans. We all have faults, but we're accepted either despite or because of those things. That's just part of being human being. And so I think that's something that's just driven me, is this idea of, everybody's covered by grace. It's not a list of do's and don'ts. It's not who you're politically associated with. It's not how healthy you are. I think those are things that I think come later as we evolve in the understandings of grace. But grace is one of those things that's just been complete freedom. And I find that people on both sides are afraid of grace because, progressives are afraid of grace because they're afraid you're not going to help social justice issues. And conservatives are afraid of grace because they think you're going to go out and do whatever you want. And I see grace as a type of anarchy where it doesn't fit into any hierarchy. And I've always been drawn to that.
Yeah, that's a powerful message. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I think it's very punk rock, and I like that.
Yeah, right. Well, and I think that everyone needs grace. We live in a culture now with they call it cancel culture.
Yeah.
And something that maybe you don't know is that I work with LGBT teenagers all the time. I have a nonprofit that I've started that cares for queer kids in a very conservative part of California.
Very cool.
And one of the things that I'm constantly talking to them about is being able to live in tension, right? Be able to sit in those awkward moments and allow for grace to arrive. When we want to cut people out or we just want to throw away people, that doesn't allow for their minds and hearts to be transformed or ours.
That's true. I mean, if it wasn't for people like Martin Luther King Jr., I think, he knew how to live in tension completely. He was sitting down with people who were literally killing his brothers and sisters and eventually even killed him. But that idea of living in tension is how we change things. It's when we want to create, I don't think there's anything wrong with safe spaces, but I don't think we need to live in them. I think we need to grow in them and learn how to live within tension so we can make changes. I don't think the ELCA, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, would be an affirming church had it not been for people who were willing to sit in that church and live in the tension and make the changes and help progress the changes that needed to be made in order for them to be open and affirming, So I'm always grateful for when people are able to live in the tension. Maybe not everybody can, but that's kind of I feel like I was born and raised in the tension. So right. That's where I kind of live.
Yeah. Right. How would you identify redemption? What are characteristics of redemption, and what roles do you think it plays in our faith?
Well, I remember growing up always hearing I've been redeemed in the blood of the Lamb.
Oh my gosh, that's so triggering.
Yes, you're welcome. Right? Well, Well, and I was thinking, it's funny because you sent me, before we had the conversation, you sent me some questions about redemption. I was like, I haven't really thought a lot about redemption. And I mean, redemption, basically the idea of salvation, even grace could fall in redemption. And so the funny thing is, instead of getting in my Bible or looking in my lexicon, I did two things. I typed it into Google and just looked at the Webster dictionary definition of redemption, which I kind of agree with and kind of don't agree with. And then I also just listened to Redemption Song by Bob Marley.
Yes. That's actually what I did in preparation for this conversation.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Bob Marley caught it pretty well. I mean, I guess at the start, where did the get it wrong is because redemption talks about in the Webster's dictionary, one of the explanations is that it's something that's paid and bought for by someone else and then given to you. I'm not a big atonement theory person. I mean, I believe that was their best understanding of when, why Jesus died, in a sacrificial system. They were going like, well, this must be it. And honestly, I don't think it's a bad hypothesis for them, but, for their understanding in the culture and the time. But grace, if it's a free gift, there's not a transaction. There's not some sort of financial transaction or a blood transaction or anything like that. So as I thought about redemption, I think redemption, and it talked about being, set free from sin. Well, then if I think about sin, I think about us being incomplete. And I think sin is more about being incomplete. And I think redemption allows us to live in that incompleteness. It allows us to live because nothing completes us. I haven't found anything yet. Not religion, not relationships. They might for a small time, but they haven't for me. I find that incompleteness is alive and well in my unconscious and eventually rises to the top. I think redemption allows us to live with the contradictions of life. And I honestly don't believe that I don't believe there is life without contradictions. Even when we realize it, we still have those contradictions, but I think it's a little bit better to realize that we have those contradictions and see those. But it also allows us to see contradiction in our enemies. And by able to loving our enemies more, because we realize I'm full of contradictions, maybe my enemy has some contradictions too. And it allows me to have a little bit more grace for those who might not understand me or not accept me for who I am or for what I believe. Because if I went by like the idea of the traditional thought of redemption, my mother would have never been redeemed. My parents were never redeemed. They never like fully restored. But I believe my parents became, especially my mother, became a stronger person for the suffering that she went through. So I think redemption is just learning to live with your brokenness, live with your incompleteness, live with the contradictions of life, and learning to accept those. And Paul Tillich has this great talk where he talks about, it's called You Are Accepted, and just accepting that you're accepted without any hope of changing or knowing more or being better or anything else. You are accepted. You might not even believe more, or even believe at all. But learning to have this acceptance of oneself, of not being whole and complete, because I think that's the thing is we want to sell certainty through religion or completeness through religion or through fashion or through music or things like that. And I think that's, I think, if the devil was a real person, that would be the biggest trick the devil ever pulled was making us think that there was some sort of completeness on the other side of religion or faith or anything else.
A big fan of your mother's, and I'm sure she was a big fan of her. RuPaul,
yes,
often
they were friends.
Often says, if you can't love yourself, how in the hell are you going to love anybody else? And so, what I hear you saying around redemption is, redemption starts with a recognition, certainly of where we've been, but it does not define where we're going. I think for any of us who have been on this faith journey, who have sort of walked away from evangelicalism, who had an idea of what it meant to be a Christian, what it meant to be a faithful person, when we walk away, we're left with sort of shambles. Like,
Yeah.
like all of that falls away. And then you're sort of left with this, well, now what? What I would like to draw attention to in this conversation from what you've already said is, you are good as you are right now. And what you've done in the past, whatever choices you've made or behaviors you had that maybe you regret, maybe it's the way that recently we did an episode on conversion therapy. And some of my co-hosts were talking about being youth pastors and sort of having to acknowledge like that they may have encouraged their young people at that time to seek help and how they
Yeah.
regret that, And so I think we all carry this sense of regret. But I think redemption allows us to start new every day, right? There's that scripture, you are new every morning. And it gives us the freedom to offer ourselves grace and offer others grace.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's the freedom from the pursuit of happiness. I don't have to be happy to be complete or redeemed, but I was told in the church my whole life that somehow redemption would make me whole and complete and happy. I find myself, a lot of the running I've done from the church having to do with just a bad understanding of theology, a bad understanding of redemption and the grace and things like that. And those words being made into something magical that did not live on a human plane.
Correct.
And if Jesus Jesus is the Son of God and Jesus became, or son, or God, or however you want to look at it, becomes human and enters into the human experience and breaks into that with, brokenness and all this stuff, and all the hurt and all the pain. We all obviously know Jesus suffered. And, I think if you read the Gospels, you'll even realize Jesus was not a perfect person. You realize is that I think to be human is divine.
Right. Yes.
And I think that was the divinity of Christ, is that, why would God become man? So for me, I've found a lot of freedom in that. I went through a really bad divorce this past year. It's my second marriage. I have 2 kids from this marriage, and I've never felt such pain in my life. I've never gone through such I had a mental breakdown, and I've never experienced anything like that before. And I've had to realize, I was sold a bill of goods my whole life. I mean, there were times where I would be in my shower just crying out to Jesus saying, just show up. What the hell? I thought things were supposed to be okay. I thought you were supposed to be here, and for me, it was one of those things where I had to realize is that all this pain and suffering is creating me into a new human being who's actually comfortable being who I am even more, and allowing me to accept myself for who I am, despite what others may think or say. And I had to go through that. And I don't want to, but that's kind of living life on life's terms. And I think we're just always looking for an easy out or an escape or something like that. And I think it's kind of an American idea, especially. And we've just added it to faith and religion and just been like, it's the easy way out. But what do we say when people are suffering and alone and have no hope? Oh, it's going to get better. Well, I mean, yeah, time does help heal a multitude of wounds and sins. But who you are, if you really work through stuff and go through it, you become a different person. And I think we're often sold this idea that, well, just deny it, just move on. And if you just move on and jump into another relationship or cover it with other things, or looking for the sacred object that will complete you, you end up hurting yourself. And like I said before, is your pain just waits for you.
Yeah, that's right. I think that there's something really true about this, the process of grieving, right? Or of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
As someone who is in parish ministry, I sit with people all the time who are in the throes of grief. They've lost someone they love. I just recently had a member die, and her husband, they've been together for 53 years. And to just sort of sit with him and to say, nobody is asking you to be better tomorrow.
Yeah.
On Sunday I brought him food and he was like, "Oh, I should have been in church." And I was like, "The hell you should be in church."
Right.
One of the things that the prophet Bob Marley says in that redemption songs is, all I've ever had are redemption songs. And so I think that life is a continuous unfolding of redemption. It's like we just continue to experience these crazy ass moments, and they are continuing to refine us. It's not willed meaning, right? We get to make that meaning. But it feels like when Bob Marley is saying, all I've ever had is redemption songs, it's like out of these moments of suffering and strife, I continue to see myself being more refined. What do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I don't believe in a literal hell, but I do believe that going through the hell that I did with the past year was refining. It burnt off a lot of my tendency to want to be a people pleaser, and my fear of conflict. Funny that I would have a fear of conflict when I've done so much crazy work, but I had it on a personal level.
Yeah.
And that's gone off. That's gone for the most part. And for me, that's a purifying level, and that's like the fires of hell purifying you in a way. Mike Ness has in one of his songs from Social Distortion, he goes, there's got to be a heaven because I've already done my time in hell. And I was always, taught when I was a kid that the hell's fire was purifying for some reason. I don't know why I heard that growing up, but when we go through hell here, we purify, we become something else and someone else. And we're able to hold on to those things that are important to us, but we're also able to change and see things and learn new things and, become a new, I don't want to say new creation, but a new person, a new human.
Yeah, indeed. I know that you have shared publicly on Instagram. You have a great Instagram, by the way. I actually love following you on Instagram.
I have an Instagram addiction. So yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You've
shared for affirming my addiction.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. All those synapses in your brain that are being fired because you're getting those accolades. Absolutely. But you've talked about your own struggle with depression. I also struggle with depression and anxiety. And I wonder about, in relationship to faith and mental illness and redemption, what does that look like? Sometimes it's just hard for me to get out of bed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I mean, sometimes I feel like I've had a successful day if I've taken a shower, what does redemption look like in mental health? I mean, for me, it's doing the work, to understand philosophy a little bit that I do. I was always asking my buddy Pete, like, oh, what's a good book? Like I wanted a book to explain it to me, and he kept giving me books and recommending more books. I'm like, damn it, Pete, just, Dummy's Guide to Philosophy. That's all I need,
Right.
And I'll have it down. And he's like, no, you have to put in the work. And we were talking recently and I was like, well, I understand this. Why can't they understand it? And he's like, because Jay, you spent the past few years and especially this past year putting in the work and reading the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And with therapy and my mental health is what I've realized is I went to good doctors, got my medications straightened out. I did some really hard therapy. I mean, I don't like ECT. It was electric shock therapy. It was one of the toughest things I'd ever done and really felt dehumanizing in some ways, but it also really helped me. I have done EMDR, and I've also done dialectic behavioral therapy. And I had to spend years. I've spent a couple of years in dialectic behavioral therapy, and it's really helped. And now I'm ready to move on to doing some psychoanalysis, so I've seen redemption there. I've seen to the point where one of my therapists is like, oh, I'm ready for you to, not see me anymore because you're doing a great job. But it's been putting in the hard work, and being grateful that I've been able to have insurance to do that, because that's a reality in this country too. I just lost insurance and had to get on what some people call Obamacare just recently in order to continue to do my therapy. But, I think therapy plays a big role in that, learning to, who you are. I think understanding the unconscious is helpful. I've read some Freud, and that's been very helpful. But, it takes time, and giving yourself that time to do that. That's where that self-acceptance is important, is being able to sit in your suffering. And having a few good friends has been life-changing for me, because I had a lot of people who told me to quit and give up who were friends. But I also had another friend who said, it doesn't matter. I'm like, well, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. It doesn't matter, Jay. Your work on grace is amazing. Continue to move forward and share your art, your work with other people. And I held on to that little bit of hope, even when I was hopeless, and just continued to work. I mean, there were times where I'd show up to church and go like, hey, can we all just have a conversation today? Because I'm so depressed. I don't have anything to talk to you about. And we did. We just talked, So I don't know. I think being transparent with others too. You find out who your friends are really when you go through that. You find out who really loves you when you go through that. And not that everybody who rejects you doesn't love you, because there are some people who just don't know how to deal with mental health, and it frightens them.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's something really powerful about being a vulnerable leader. I mean, I definitely think there's something you should never bleed on the people around you, right? Like, but
don't tell my congregation that, because I think some of them are covered in my blood.
But there is something important about showing up in a way that allows your congregation to meet that energy. If you cannot model vulnerability and authenticity, then you're setting your congregation up, or the community, whatever community you're a part of, to live inauthentically with each other.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a part of, Revolution we don't have a denomination. We're not a part of a bigger body. And so, I mean, I tried to take my own life a little bit over a year ago, and within a few weeks was back speaking to people, because I didn't have the choice to take time off or have my, assistant pastor or call somebody from the denomination and ask them to cover for me. I had to go back to work. And, but the best thing I could do is be as transparent as possible with the congregation. So, I mean, that's why I jokingly say there's probably some blood on some of my folks. But, I've also met a lot of people who just started listening this past year and said what a difference the church has made in their life, and my messages have made in their life. And for me, I'm like always shocked, because I'm like, man, I've been through hell this past year. I didn't feel like I was giving anything. It's strange to hear responses of what people say when they just hear your heart or hear your pain or your suffering. It's been a really beautiful experience to see that this type of thing even works when you're in your darkest hour, and that you're still able to do your art, and sometimes do the best art you've ever done.
All we've ever known is redemption songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that you were talking about earlier that I wanted to tap back to before we move on is this idea of self. I think that one of the things that evangelicals really struggle with is a sense of self. Because for many of them, they were told to have this sort of fake humility, right? If you were, don't be prideful. That's what we were told. Don't be prideful. And so anything good that could come from you, you gave credit to God. And any bad thing you ever did was the devil made you do it, right? It was the devil's fault. And so I think one of the biggest transitions that those leaving the evangelical church have to come to grips with is, who are you? Finding that self. So I just wondered your thoughts about that.
No, I mean, I felt like most of my life, I felt like I was a piece of shit. Yeah. And the church taught me that. I learned a lot of that in the church. Then I went out into the more progressive thinking church, and then I started to say, well, then your worth is found in how many good books you've read, or how smart you are, or how much education you have. So then again, I felt like a piece, so I kind of had to get to a point where I've just accepted me personally for who I am and who I've become, and to find some pride even in that, Yeah, I mean, hearing how, horrible we were, how bad we were supposed to be. And then if you go take that into like people who've gone through like more of a even Calvinist view of that, it even gets even worse because you just think you're just, even a worse piece of shit. I grew up Assemblies of God, so we weren't Calvinist. We were free will. So that played into a different dynamic. But still, I don't know. I think, that whole idea of hating yourself or hating the flesh and hating all that stuff is misunderstood. It's greatly misunderstood. And I think the church just created a new law, new works, and a new type of flesh that they became dependent on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift gears here.
Yeah, love to.
A primary focus of evangelical Christianity and the prosperity gospel has been personal redemption. We talked a little bit about that earlier. At the same time, it helped empower a political and cultural movement that denied the right of women, people of color, the LGBT community. How have you seen people seek reparations for the damage they have done? Or what can those of us who have done harm do?
It's, strange thing going back to my history. I was 11 years old when my parents lost everything. But I was really lucky to be a part of a church at that time and a little bit later, another church where it was pretty inclusive. It didn't really have to deal with what the color of your skin was or if you were a woman. I mean, our church, we allowed women to preach and we're equals. Look at me finding good things in the assemblies. And I knew, I'm sure the LGBT thing was not acceptable at the time.
Still is not.
Yeah, still is not in assemblies, definitely. But it was one of those things at the time where I saw more inclusion, and I saw my parents loving people. So I'm really lucky to be in that grown up seeing that, and then later to be a part of another church that was called the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, which had its own issues, but it was very inclusive. So I was lucky to see some of that as well. As far as reparations, I've not seen a whole lot of people get that. I've seen people fight for inclusion and get inclusion. But sometimes, I think the idea of grace too, and this is a tough one to swallow, especially as I'm the white male sitting here, heterosexual white male, is saying that sometimes we just have to let go of what we've lost and look to the future. And maybe that's where redemption comes in. No one gets what they deserve. Look at wealthy, rich people. Do they look like they deserve it? And look at the poor people. Do they look like they deserve it? To get what they deserve. I think we want to be paid back. And I think grace says, I don't have to be paid back. Grace says, I will move forward. And for so many people, they don't realize how better they are off with the fact that they aren't paid back, or the fact that they have suffered, because they've become models for others to live. I look at people like Lawrence, our friend Lawrence, who is a transgender Black man, and everything he's been through. And he is probably the most Christ-like pastor I know. When I see Lawrence, I don't see African American. I don't see transgender. I see someone I connect with on such a human level and gives me so much hope. And now those things are definitely part of his story, and I recognize that. But me and him connect over shared suffering and shared pain, not the same pain, but pain being the great equalizer. And it's really transformed my life having a relationship with Lawrence, and made me a better person, and continue to remind me that we all have suffering in common. It might not be from the same things, but learning to live in that suffering. And I would say Lawrence deserves a lot more than what he's got, but because he doesn't have it, he is who he is. And I don't think he would trade that. And I wouldn't trade it for my friendship with Lawrence at all. and the ministry that Lawrence has pastored in my life. I would like to see people get what they deserve, but it's just not my business, my experience as a human being to see that that's what happens, unfortunately. But I've seen a lot of great people come out of that better people because of it.
Right. I think that's a slippery slope, though, because we could say, I mean, this is the old argument of, you suffer and, just stay suffering and eventually it'll get better. Right. And so I think there is a sense in which, we are called to acknowledge the pain of the past and ideally, as you've said, move forward from it. But it's only until we can articulate those things that cause that pain and ask people to confront the systems that put them there in the first place. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but that's what you're asking people to do is fight. You're saying stand up and make a difference. You're not asking for reformation. What's the word? I'm sorry.
Reparation.
Reparation. That's not reparation. That's going into the fight. That's going in and saying, go and, accept what you've been through, go through that and change it, and help other people realize what you've been going through. That's a different, that's why I'm pushing back a little bit, is because I think that's a different call. We're talking about asking people to, I want people to learn from their pain and accept their pain and change people. So I would agree with you there. But when you ask somebody to go into a fight, that's not them getting what they deserve, because probably what they deserve is a nice place to live, a good job, some sort of like security, and being given back what they've lost. And that's why I'm not always consider myself a progressive, is because I think we have a progressive idea is that, we're going to somehow get everybody back what they deserve and everybody's going to be taken care of. And I want that, but that's just not the world I live in. I would love to have wholeness and completeness out of my life and get back things that I've lost. But unfortunately, those things are gone. That time has passed. And so I'm not saying stay in your pain. I'm saying, maybe the greatest gift is that we do learn how to live with our pain and to allow that pain to evolve into character and give us the strength to help other people and love other people to find some sort of, not wholeness, but some sort of peace in their life. That peace that passes all understanding. There's a reason it passes understanding, is because it's not $1 million. That would be understandable. But a peace that says, hey, I've learned to accept that I'm accepted and learn to live life on life's terms. And I think everybody suffers on different levels. If we were in a third world country, we would definitely be suffering in a completely different way than we do now. Our mental health or certain things in our life might not be that important. I think someone who's starving in another country and hungry or dying of diseases where they can't get help would look at Twitter and be like, and see how we talk about the president and the politics and the cancel culture. And they would just laugh and think it was ridiculous. How easy we scapegoat one another in political issues. I think we major in some really weird stuff in this country.
Yeah, I wonder about I read that you had met with Joel Osteen, and I'd love to talk to you more about that, in terms of talking to him about LGBT issues. But I think that that's, in a sense, some of what I'm getting at, the courage to have the conversation and see if people are able to acknowledge where they've been and try to work for something better. When we talk about these prosperity gospel churches that have millions and millions of dollars, instead of keeping it and building, I'm in a community where worship is 30,000 people on a Sunday morning, and what are they doing for the community? Well, they're making sure that queer history is not being taught. They are policing. They're hiring private police. I mean, not in my community, but there are other evangelical churches, a few hours from here, who are paying to hire police.
Oh, no. I mean, I was raised with bodyguards. I get it.
So what I wonder about is where, where can we invite people to acknowledge their wrongs and invite them to spend their money better or to invest in communities that they have robbed.
Yeah, no, I agree. But one of the things we have to do is we have to stop scapegoating each other and canceling one another and vilifying one another, because what we want to, it's really easy to say like these people are bad and these people are good. I do not believe that one person is completely good or one person is completely bad. I think that's a dangerous way of thinking. And I think it leads to scapegoating. And then we don't have to take any responsibility for our own actions and our own self. So what we have to do is we have to learn to argue well. We have to learn how to build a community where we all don't agree with one another. But that also means sacrificing some of our desires and some of our wants and saying, well, I might not be recognized for this or this or this, because if I'm going to sit down at the table with them, and that's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. He sat down with people who did not recognize his humanity because he was a black man. And that's hard to ask people to do, especially in this culture, especially, I feel like a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to go where I'm not recognized and not accepted. And a part of me goes like, yeah, you're right. You know what I mean? And that church has every right not to recognize or accept you. So you know what? Ignore them. Or if you want to see them change, then we've got to, we're going to have to practice nonviolence, which is also of the tongue, is of the heart, and all this stuff, and requires a lot of self-sacrifice. So asking people to go in and make these changes and confront these churches requires asking people to give up more. To unless they just want to like throw a firebomb through the window, Otherwise, you've got to make sacrifices to have these conversations. We have to give up the need to always be perfect or right or complete. We have to recognize the contradictions within our own self and within them, because we have to realize that some of these people are really good. Like I see people sending out tweets about like, people have told me to stop loving my family members because they're Trump supporters. But my dad was the only one who would take care of my children when I had to go go to work or do this. And how do I write him out of my life when he showed me love in that area? Because what they realize is it's not this like good or bad. It's just people are people. And, there's probably a reason that he voted for Trump and believed in Trump, but there's also a reason why he's compassionate enough to take care of his daughter's kids and help her through a hard time and do all this stuff. And with this kind of internet, social media culture, it's just easy to say, well, I'm going to write them off. And it's just not that easy. So when we want to have hard conversations, we also have to not only speak, but we have to shut up and listen and also look at their stories too. We want everybody to listen to our story, but are we willing to listen to their story? And I think back to Martin Luther King Jr. again, I think he had a great way of looking at people. Is he's saying they're not the enemies, the information is the enemies, and they are actually victims of misinformation. And going in with that idea of going like, this person is not my enemy. More or less, these people are victims just as much as I'm a victim. And they just never got out, or they never got disillusioned. And what would you rather be? Would you rather be the person who's in the $1 million church who has, was never set free from those thoughts and never let go? Or would you rather be the person you are now who's at least free and living your life and doing that? So there's a price that comes with enlightenment. There's a price that comes with being a radical. There's a price that comes with that thinking. That's what I was liked about punk rock is because, and what I like about anarchy, they all both have holes in them, but the idea is that, I don't need to be the head person. I don't need to be part of the status quo. I'm going to live my life. And so it's like, we want the status quo to recognize us, but at the same time, we don't want to be part of them. And then here's another problem is when people do change, who was the guy who wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Do you know what his name was?
No, I don't.
No. Well, he recently came out and denounced that book.
Yeah.
And, he said, he made a mistake and all that. He wasn't really a believer or anything anymore. And the most people I saw online were angry at him. So, is the goal to change people, but then when people change, we don't accept it? I mean, isn't that the same thing the church has always done? The church actually might be better at accepting people when they change and they ask for forgiveness than we are. The conservative church might be better than that than progressives are, to be honest with you. And so that's unfortunate. But what can we learn from that? How to be better forgivers. There's a dialectic at work here, and I don't think it's easy, but this is what happens when you start to think about this stuff and process it and look it over and go like, it's just not a dualistic way. You just can't have this dualistic way of thinking. It's just not a black and white thought. It would just be much easier if it was, but it's just not. It is complicated. We're all complicated people with different stories and different things that are happening in our unconscious and different experiences. And I'm not saying that lets them off. I'm obviously still going to go talk to churches about being, inclusive and open and affirming. But I'm just saying, think through this stuff. We have to think through it, in order to recognize each other as humanity. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to have the conversation. If I come into a church with like Joel Osteen and be like, well, you're just a closed-minded asshole and you're bigoted and you're wrong, what's he going to say to me? Could you please leave? But instead I have to say like, I get, can we go over the scriptures together? What are the verses that concern you? Why do you still feel that this is an important issue? Why do you still think it's, being LGBTQ is a sin, enough to, not include people or say it's not God's best? Can you show that to me? And can we talk about these verses? When I met with Osteen, he's like, well, what about Sodom and Gomorrah? So I had to sit down and show him that was about hospitality and not about being gay or lesbian. And here's one of the biggest pastors in the world. And I'm explaining Sodom and Gomorrah to him, and I'm a high school dropout, But that was the thing, is we had to be able to willing to sit down and have a conversation, and he had other people with him who were very hostile towards me. But me and him had a connection in a conversation. Now, did I leave and he'd go like, oh, we're an affirming church? No, because it's way more complicated than that. He had people who are like, we'll never be an affirming church. We'll never be this, who are people that make big decisions. I think he has a lot of people who make decisions for him. Did I think he wanted to become an affirming church and an inclusive church? I'll be honest with you. Yes, I really feel like if it was up to him, they would be. And I don't think that guy's perfect. I mean, that guy's got a lot of bad theology. He also has some really good theology on grace. One sermon I heard him give on grace, I was like, and this must have been 15, 20 years ago. And I was just like, mind blown by his concept of grace. But, but then he goes back into prosperity gospel and being happy and, selling all that stuff. But I saw somebody who was like, yeah, I really want to love gay people. It was almost like the people who are like, well, you're going to go to hell. I'm sorry. I didn't make the rules. You know what I mean? It was just like they want more out of God, but they don't believe God is that good, or that the concept of grace is too good to be true. And so they just temper it, I'm sorry to go on a rant like that. It's just, I think a lot. I think way too much.
My experience recently also with the evangelicals in this community is that they're just unsure of what to do with queer people. They know that we are not going anywhere, right? We know that fortunately we, for now, live in a society where we can be out and open and in most places safe, and they don't know what to do with that. And they're held to these misunderstandings of Scripture, right? I mean, and misunderstandings and cultural, in church culture. A lot of times when I talk to young people, and they tell me about their parents and the grief that their parents have for them coming out, I often will share with them that I think it's not that they don't love you, but if they are in an evangelical church, their biggest fear is to lose the community. Growing up evangelical, the message is you stay in your tribe, you stay in your camp, you worship together, you go to each other's holiday parties, you have no friends outside of this community. And so for a young person to step out and speak their truth, it puts their parents at risk of losing their entire social network.
Yeah. And I mean, and what causes, we have to look at what is the cause that our teachings would cause parents to choose a community over their own blood, over their own family, over their own kids? I mean, what's the dynamic there? What's at play there? What is the underlined insecurities and the manipulation that we've caused to say like, oh, this community is more important than your family, or God is more important than, your children,
Right. I mean, when we talk about, all of these things, but especially when we talk about the church that says we are we are pro-family, and they are the first to throw their children out. They're the first to say that these children locked away in cages on our southern border, it's just like, it's concerning to me. You cannot be the ones preaching pro-family and are also the ones that are saying there's a caveat to that, right?
It's like being pro-life and pro-gun or pro-death penalty. You just go like, this makes no sense. Use another word.
Right.
At least. I feel like the evangelical church and most churches in this country are dying. And I think that might be a good thing.
Yep.
Kind of my hope is that they'll die so much that they'll have to start to come together with other churches and maybe have tough conversations and start to change their ways of thinking. But I think it's going to require all of us being willing to have the conversation that we're having right now, but willing to be in an unsafe place and being willing to be triggered and be willing to, be even bullied a little bit to go into these places and have these conversations to make these changes. But you have to decide, is this the change I want to make? Or do we just want to say, you know what? I'm not going to fight this church anymore. I'm just going to go do my own church. I'm just going to go do my own thing. Me, I'm all about changing the other church. Like I have my own church, but I'm still about trying to get you to do better. Because I still have hope for the church. I still have hope that the church can become better and that it can change. But and I'm worried about the kids growing up in that church. You know what I mean? And I worry about the queer kids growing up in that church. And I worry about those kids. And that's why I want to go in there. That's why I want to go to those places and have those conversations. Because like me, I don't force my kids to go to church. I usually ask their mom to watch them when I have them on the weekend of church, because I don't want them to feel like, I don't want to brainwash them even to my type of theology. I want them to have those free choices. But a lot of kids don't have that, and so that's probably the reason why I would still want to see the church change. But I guess what I'm trying to say is not everybody has to go to the fight if they don't want to. And I've just seen lately a lot of people who feel very hurt and very ostracized and might not be ready for the fight, or just don't have the tools that it takes and they need to heal. And so, take your time, heal and get better, and maybe eventually you'll be ready to go do that stuff. You don't have to become radical overnight, because so many people are just so hurt and feel so ostracized and so completely diminished by the church that, maybe the safest thing they can do is take some time away from it.
Right. We are not the sum of our pain, right? And I think that that's sort of a really important message. Like, nobody's asking you to go back and fight if that's going to be unsafe for you. But if you want to see the world change, it's going to require all hands on deck. I was just texting this morning with one of my deacons who was talking about how she serves the homeless in her community. And that, many of them, she's African American, many of them she's serving food to are wearing Make America Great Again hats.
Yeah,
and it's
that's
hard.
Pretty crazy. Yeah.
It's hard for her to do it. But she says, Pastor, this is my attempt to put good in the world where there is so much hate and pain. And to sit in the tension and to serve hungry people, and to know that they may not do the same for me is the best thing I can do.
Yeah, that's amazing. Think about how many families are getting ready to, how many people are ready to be around the holiday season is such a tough time. I used to really give grief to, sometimes I felt like unnecessarily gave grief to people like, oh, I'm going to stay in here and stay in the denomination and change it. And I'd be like, you need to leave, But now I have way more respect for people who are able to stay in that type of situation and be that little bit of hope and that little bit of that little rub, you know what I mean? That little friction in the cog. Because where would we be without people like that? It's hard because you're going to be like, well, are you compromising And I've always had a hard time, like people who attend churches that aren't affirming, I'm always like, well, would you go to a church that was whites only? But I guess you have to know what your purpose is to be there.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, that was really deep, man. That was you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Do you have any final thoughts as we close out about redemption or anything else that you'd like to add to the conversation?
I would like to add is go easy on yourself. Take time. I'm not an expert on any of this, so I'll take what you like and leave the rest. Take time with yourself and learn to love yourself. And if you want to love others, that takes time. People are hard to love. And it feels like in this world, most people don't give a damn. So if you want to give a damn, that's a good place to start. One step forward and, every now and then 2 steps back. But, know that you are where you're supposed to be. You're accepted the way you are and learn to love yourself. And hopefully through that, you'll be able to love others more and be more compassionate. And, every ounce of hell I've been through so far in my life, I mean, I'm very grateful that I failed at killing myself because honestly, there would be no more me. But everything I've learned through the hardships and pain and this desperation to the point of not wanting to live anymore, getting through that has allowed me to become a better person and appreciate my work more and to think about these issues and people in very different ways and actually become more inclusive of my enemies and loving them even more. And I think has made me a better person. I hope it has. So I guess just don't give up, Don't let those thoughts that tell you to give up. Don't give up. Just keep walking forward. I know it might feel like hell and this might sound like a cliche, but don't give up because I think there's always, life will ebb and flow. It's like waves, but I think eventually not eventually, but at times life will be worth living.
Yeah. So to all of you listening, may redemption songs ring in your ears and your heart.
Amen.
May you know that you are good, you are whole in this moment, right? Just as you are right now. And again, thank you very much. Let us know what you think. To add your voice to this particular conversation, comment on the show notes at Irenicast.com. Also, on the show notes, you'll find relevant links and complete list of all other ways to like, follow, and contact the show. That will do it for us this week. If you have found value in the show and you would like to support us, you can check us out at Irenicast.com/support. There you will find all the ways you can support the show, including through PayPal, Amazon, and checking out our Irenicast merch. Jay, you totally should check out our Irenicast merch.
Definitely.
And don't forget to subscribe to the show and never miss an episode. We are available on all major podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Pandora, and many more. And while you're there, if your platform allows it, please leave us a rating and or review. We are always looking for more and more ways to hear from you. So for this week, I'm Casey. Thanks for joining the conversation.